Hi, I'm Glenn Campbell, and I'm running for school board here in the city of Coeur d'Alene in Zone 5. We're here today to talk about critical race theory. My Facebook page has been blown up with people telling me that critical race theory is not being taught in our school district. Well, with me right now is our local CRT scholar who has spent thousands of hours studying what critical race theory is all about. Laura Van Voorhees, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Glenn.
What started you into this process of studying critical race theory? Why did you get started studying it?
Several years ago, I sent my daughter to college, Sacramento State University, and when she graduated, I didn't know who she was anymore, and she even admitted she didn't know who she was anymore. A very close relationship turned into a strained, and now it's turned into an estranged relationship. I haven't seen or talked to her in over 2 years because she wants nothing to do with me because of what she was taught in college. So, having to understand that, I always need to know why things happen. This is the way I am. And so I started looking into what this critical race theory is all about. And so I started studying, and I realized it has communist roots. And so I started studying communist infiltration of the country, which has been going on for well over 100 years in this country. And one book led to another until it brought me down to wanting to understand exactly how it has infiltrated the schools. And we've probably all heard how it's infiltrated the schools all across this country. Started out at universities, and now it's in all of the schools throughout, not every single school, but many schools and many school districts throughout the country.
It's in the news today a lot. You see it
Yes,
all through the news.
it is.
So,
And their newest target market is 0 to 5-year-olds, which is horrifying.
yeah, it is.
And so no child is safe. They know if they can get children, the earlier they can get them and put these poisonous, toxic ideas into their heads, the easier they will be tools for the globalists and little communist social activists.
Okay. Well, so the question that we want to answer right now is critical race theory being taught in the Coeur d'Alene School District?
Yes, to answer you. They say critical race theory is not being taught. And the trick to that is that the theory is not being taught, but it is being practiced. And we know it's being practiced because all throughout the frameworks, they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are the hallmark terms of critical race theory. Anywhere you see them talk about equity, they're talking about leveling the playing field, about equaling shares out. The definition, I use James Lindsay a lot, newdiscourses.com, give him a plug. Equity means adjusting shares in order to make citizens A and B equal. It's an intentional redistribution of shares. And when you hear those terms, you know that we're talking about Marxism. And when you talk about diversity, that you're talking about different races and different cultures, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But these terms and what's being taught in the schools has a completely political objective. And so it's not about just learning about cultures and what foods do they eat and how do they celebrate this event. How do they celebrate Christmas versus how do we celebrate Christmas, for instance? We're not talking about that when we're talking about diversity. We're talking about race and inclusion. When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about safe spaces. And I understand that I'm not sure about 2 of the high schools, but I know that, and I saw it in the literature, that at least Lake City high schools have little stickers above doors now. And I would be surprised if they weren't in all the schools. Have little safe space stickers. So they know they can go in there and talk to that teacher if they're feeling scared or feeling not safe for some reason. And we want our kids to feel safe, but this is a different. They pervert the terminology to what safe means. They're we know that they've been trying to talk kids into becoming like telling girls, well, maybe you really want to be a boy. And then we had a incident last year where a kid was talked into doing a transgender thing, and anyway, that sort of thing's going on. So it means different things. They pervert the language and the terminology. If you read the Portrait of a Graduate, it sounds really good. Well, I want my kid to be able to do that and have those skills, but they don't come out in actuality what they make it sound like in the frameworks.
So CRT is not being taught under the guise of CRT, but it's being disguised as people talk about social emotional learning.
Yes.
People talk about these three words here.
Yes.
Explain to us a little bit about the social emotional learning and how that is going on in our schools, and how is that tied together with the words. Again, they're saying no CRT is being taught, but there's other things. How is that tied together with CRT?
Well, you mentioned social emotional learning, and I call social emotional learning the Trojan horse that allows equity to be introduced. So what they do is they'll talk to kids about their feelings. Like I've had parents contact me. My happy girl, she's now being taught to draw angry faces and a mad face, well, angry and unhappy faces, and to teach her about other feelings. And the mother was horrified that her daughter had come home with these really terrible looking faces. And they're like, what are they doing that in school for? And I just heard today that from a mother that third graders being taught by the school counselor about power. And that's what this is all about, is power, just like Black Lives Matter. They're about power. This is about taking over kids, using social emotional learning to take over kids' minds in the interest of social justice. And it's the goal of it is to destroy everything. And that's what people have to understand when they talk about critical race theory or critical social justice. Critical means to destroy, to tear down, and that's their goal, is to tear down our families, to tear down the children, to make them tools for the globalists, to make them social justice warriors, and it's nothing good. It's about communism.
Well, I have heard it described as they're telling kids that you are smarter than your grandparents, you're smarter than your parents. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the word social justice warriors. A lot of teachers believe that they're not doing anything in teaching this. Is there anything that you can make them aware of? I think you've just talked about that, but there's anything special that you might ask them to look at deeply if you were going to be speaking to a teacher right now? We are talking to some teachers right now. What would you tell them to keep their eyes open for if you didn't?
Well, I know that they have I have receipts through records requests of teachers and administrators being sent to Denver. And when I looked at the, I can't think of the name right now, I'd have to look it up, PEBC, whatever it is. It's in Denver. And when you look at their site, they're all about training you to train kids for equity. And it's all about the same, it always goes back to these three terms. We're focused on equity and diversity and inclusion. Well, that's critical race theory, and there is no other way to look at it. Some teachers are saying, well, they're telling us that equity is if a kid's struggling in math, he gets extra help, or special needs kids. And I think you have a story you shared with me today. We could talk about that.
Yeah. So this is something that came across my feed today, a question that was asked. I'm going to give this to you and let you see what you feel about it. What is your stance on equity replacing equality in our schools, specifically about special education? That's where people are lot of people hammer on special education. If equality means everyone is treated the same and equity recognizes that different people need different support throughout their lives, then special education is certainly the manifestation of equity. What is your feeling on that?
And they're using that as a smokescreen. Equity does not mean, it means equal shares. It means equal outcomes, period. There is no other use for equity. And so when they say, oh, it's giving a kid extra help in math or giving the special needs kids this IEP, that has nothing to do with equity.
And you're not saying that the kids don't, that these special needs kids need that special help.
Yeah, they already get it.
Yeah.
They have, under laws, they have every right to have special help, but that has nothing to do with equity.
Right.
That's not leveling the playing field. That's not making A and B equal. It's equal outcomes. That's equity.
So what we're doing in this particular case is we're trying to make everything equal instead of allowing our A students to continue to rise upward and be the best that they can be.
Yeah, it destroys meritocracy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And what you're asking these people is not do this. We're going to bring the F student up, and we're going to basically make it both of them having C's.
Right.
So we're going to destroy them the desire to want to do anything. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying to me?
Yes, it's because in critical race theory, and when you read the critical race theorists that are making millions of dollars off of peddling this trash, the values, the traditional American values about hard work, individualism, all those sort of things that we have traditionally encouraged our children, whether it be at home or in church or schools, to be that way, to live those values. Now they're saying that those values represent white privilege and they're racist. And that's all about critical race theory. And that's what they're doing with what they're doing in the schools is, and I love the example. They don't actually do this, at least I hope they don't actually do this, but that's a really good example for people to understand that you get an A, I get an F, but the teacher gives us both a C. That's equity in their eyes.
Right.
And that's leveling the playing field. And it gets away from individualism. It's about the collective. And you can see that in the classrooms when everything breaks into pairs or groups to have these group discussions, to talk about how you felt. I want to read this for the people because they use the CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, and if you go to the frameworks, you can
Look
see
right here in that camera.
you can see this wheel that all these pretty colors. They just have packaged this so nicely, but it's a lie. It's a phony bunch of stuff. They say that they want your children to be able to have self-awareness. Well, of course, everybody wants their kids to have
Right.
self-awareness. They want them to be able to have self-management, to be able to manage their emotions and their actions, and they want to have social awareness to be able to fit in with people, of course. And they want to they want good relationship skills and responsible decision making. Those are what CASEL promotes as their 5 core values. But let's look at what they look like in the classroom. If you go to the social emotional framework page, I had these in order. Go to page 7. So if you say self-awareness, this is what they say it'll look like in the classroom. Students completing a math assignment are asked to rank their personal stress as they move through challenging and rigorous content. At the end of the assignment, students talk in pairs about their personal process and how they notice their stress rising and subsiding. There is no indication that they care if the kids are able to solve math problems. They just want to know how they feel about solving the math problems. And so this shows the dishonesty between what it looks like in a classroom. And let's just use that example, the self-awareness. CASEL says self-awareness, the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, how they influence behavior, the ability to accurately assess one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence, optimism, and a growth mindset. What does that have to do with solving math problems and about your stress level? So if parents will look at what the SEL core competencies are and what the curriculum writers, directors say it's supposed to look like in a classroom, I would suggest there's a huge disconnect. And we could look at all those, but I would suggest the parents go and look for themselves. Page 3 and to 4, and then page 7 in the framework.
Equity framework.
And that's just one example of how they're being disingenuous with the parents.
Well, so we're talking about 5-year-olds going up, and I mean basically 5-year-olds really can't decide what cookie is good for them. You know,
Yeah.
they're asking them to, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? I know teachers out there are saying that I've talked to, teachers that we've talked to, retired teachers that we've talked to have said, all of this was packaged in a really nice, beautiful package, and it looks really, really nice. And that's and you can see those words you use right there are all great words until you start digging into it deeply. And so your recommendation to parents, just as we kind of close this out, your recommendation to parents right now, what would you tell them to do, and where would you direct them to do if they really want to research this a little bit more?
What I've done, and that anybody can do, is you go to the frameworks. They've hidden all of this horror in plain sight. What I have done is I've gone to the references, and I say, okay, who is this organization? And then I go to their website. For instance, Portrait of a Graduate. They got Portrait of a Graduate from portraitofagraduate.org, where they start out by saying how to fundamentally change your school system. So they're trying to change things, and I say not for the better, to introduce how to do this critical race theory, how to introduce these concepts and ideologies. And it's by Battelle for Kids. And the Battelle for Kids is all about how to introduce equity and diversity inclusion, and the cultural responsiveness, and all these different critical race theory terminology without calling it critical race theory, but it is critical race theory in practice, how to introduce all of this. And there's just vast amount of resources. So you go, and then you find out, when you look at your children's curriculum, you look at who wrote this curriculum. I reviewed a 9th grade English language arts curriculum. It's my perspectives. And I opened the book. First author is Morell. I can't think of his first name. Anyway, I did a Google search on Morell. Everything he's written has been critical race theory oriented. It's all about how to turn kids into little social justice warriors.
So the information is out there.
It's out there, but you have to do the research. You just have to follow the links, follow the threads.
Okay.
You know, who wrote it, what organization, what is their mission statement, look at the About Us statements, and it'll be clear that nothing but critical race theorists, writers, and organizations that are all about nothing but about social justice and equity and diversity inclusion. Every one of them has those words at their site. So it's pretty easy to find. It just takes some time.
Laura, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Glenn.
You are very welcome. And I'm sure if you have any questions, we're going to have this information on my website, glennforcda.com. We're going to put it on our Facebook page too. Laura has also told me she will make herself available to any parent, any teacher who may have more questions. Don't find out the hard way. Don't find out by losing your child to this teaching, the way she had to do this. But what this did do for her is it put her on a quest to save our kids, to save our grandkids.
And our community.
And our community is exactly right. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you.